Hey, Dr. Greer. First off, I just want to thank you for coming and being on the show. I think it's been a real contribution to understanding our knowledge of this incredible thing that's going on around us.
You're welcome.
Thank you. You've come up with a term called stagecraft. What is stagecraft to you?
Well, actually, I didn't come up with that term. It was a term that I got introduced to in the course of my education in the 90s on this issue. Mm-hmm. And that's the ability to take the technologies that they have in covert programs and set up a counterintelligence event that looks like a UFO event and make the people believe it was alien. And there are a whole constellation of them, and they've been used in different ways. For example, the Air Force intelligence officer that's in Unacknowledged discussed the Cash Landrum case, many of you have heard about, in Texas, where a UFO was out of control, being escorted by helicopters, and was going down and spewing radiation out. And these poor people, Cash and Landrum, some other people, were irradiated. And what a lot of people don't understand is that that was a test flight of a manned, with humans, craft out of the Nellis Range going to a base in Texas. The craft, the skin of it, was an extraterrestrial craft that had been acquired. The propulsion system, they couldn't quite figure out how it worked for the power plant, for the energy system. So they put in one that had a nuclear component that, as it was going, had some sort of malfunction and started spewing radiation. And it was 100% a classified, unacknowledged special access project, test flying, and I think there were 3 or 4 human occupants of that craft. And the people were seriously injured by this radiation. In that case, the counterintelligence folks were very happy for the UFO subculture to think it was an alien craft that crashed and they retrieved, because it damaged people. Subsequently, there was a lawsuit to try to compensate these people who were injured. And the government of the United States said, we have no knowledge of this. And in fact, they didn't, because it was an unacknowledged operation. I think there have been a number of these that have actually been test flights of man-made anti-gravity or test flying of ET craft that we're trying to figure out how they operate, that have gone out of control, that then the cover story will be, oh, it was an alien craft. So that serves a very important purpose, because the only thing more explosive than the idea that we're being visited by other civilizations from elsewhere is that the United States government and its contractors have operational devices that are anti-gravity and that have at times malfunctioned and there's a mess that has to be cleaned up. So,
I just want to tell everybody that Richard Doty is an AFOSI agent,
Yes.
Featured in a film on Gaia called Mirage Men, which is about how he destroyed Paul Bennewitz's life.
yes, and that's actually a more complicated story
Yes.
than it's portrayed in that movie.
Right.
But what I'm saying is that the counterintelligence people, like Doty, they have that as a responsibility.
Yes.
And that's why he talked about, we'd take bags of cash to the media to get them to either tell a story differently, or to spin it, or to suppress it, or to bring us information of something happening. And this is part of the whole problem, is that the counterintelligence operations are very effective at what they do, incredibly effective. And some of it involves staging events. For example, Doty and others have confirmed to me that they have had events happen, for example, where people have gotten too close to a facility and seen one of our test anti-gravity craft functioning wee hours of the morning, and just accidentally are there. Those people will then be targeted for an abduction sequence, where a special forces team will go in and will then abduct that person with stagecraft and use either creatures or made up looking people who are a little bit unusual, that are humans, to look like an alien using electromagnetic warfare systems that affect consciousness and certain chemicals to give people an experience of an abduction. Now, he actually admits that happened and that was done. And I know I have more than a dozen different people who do not know each other from different eras that have been involved in the military abduction programs, creating, and the stagecraft to do that is quite well developed and has been since the 50s and 60s. So the people say, well, have there been no ET contact experience? Yes, but if you don't know there's both going on, then you don't know to ask the question. Is it real or is it Memorex? Is it a man-made stagecraft or is it actual ET? And unfortunately, they're counting on the lack of scientific rigor and investigatory rigor in the UFO subculture and in the sort of the cottage industries that sprout up around this subject to actually do the digging to find out, was that experience one that was ET, or was it one that was alien, made to look alien? So I always use the word alien in quotes, because there are a number of things. So the stagecraft is quite developed. One man that I met with some years ago, and I think it was before they had fully developed the robotic ones, what I call program life forms. These little, they can look like a gray or some other kind of scary creature that are man-made. And they're on these man-made UFOs, and they have electronic warfare systems that can affect consciousness and hallucinogenic, but also chemical systems. Well, this one man, and he was from way back, I think it was in the early 60s or mid 60s. He was really short. He was like only 4 foot, I think he was 4 feet, maybe 8 or 10. And he says, yes, I was very useful because in a special operations setting, he could get in and out of places. But then they started making him up like a Hollywood with the stagecraft. And they made him look like an alien. And they had him go out, and he was on a team of people that would simulate contact experiences and abduct people. And if I had heard that from only one person inside these classified special operations, unacknowledged special access projects, I would have brushed it off as fantasy. But after I heard it from multiple people who did not know each other and were not colluding or sharing information, and that's how I do things. I get data points to say, I went, wow, that's what's going on. I learned about that between 92 and 94, 95, and that's when a big red light went off, a big red flag went off, and I went, whoa. Because honestly, when I started out in this field, I thought everyone who had experienced anything weird like this was experiencing a real ET thing. And then I realized there were two things going on, at least two things going on. Now I found out there are three. But I thought, well, it's all extraterrestrial. Then I found out there's this ability to confuse the public, but in a way that would scare them. So sometimes it's done for its psychological warfare to create a frightening event. And these are people out there who are true victims of these covert military-related abduction things. Those are real victims. I mean, people say, oh, you don't have any compassion for these victims. I do. But I said it's very important that they understand not everything that goes bump in the night is ET. There's a lot of other weird stuff going on that involves this kind of stagecraft of advanced aircraft that are U.S. or man-made, that are creatures that look alien, that aren't, that are electromagnetic systems and chemical systems that can induce experiences, and that people have been targeted with them. And also that they have then had things that are called implants put into them, RF chips that have been put in. And when I had a man who's up on our disclosure project site, Powlick is his name, who back in, I think it was the 70s, and he was working with a company that had developed a very high-tech radio frequency chip. And they were going to use it in veterinary settings. He got approached by a CIA guy and said, look, this is really state of the art. We want you to work with us. He says, well, why? And he got pulled into a project. It then got passed on to Siemens that was manufactured 2 billion of these covertly, billion, the B. And they are embeddable chips that can be used and put in people, and very, very high tech. And of course, a lot of people have found these in people and said, oh, it's an alien implant. Well, actually, EG&G and Siemens have developed multiple generations of them, and they've been used to be put in people. And they have not only a tracking capability, but also an active ability to affect people's thought consciousness experiences. So they're both they're transponders in the sense that they will send out, but they'll also receive. And I think that this kind of stuff is spooky. I know this is very spooky stuff. And when I first heard about it, I thought this cannot be. And then I had one reference point after another. It was interesting because some years ago, there was a gentleman named Bud Hopkins who had the Intruders Foundation. And his executive director called me up after I started talking about this. And I had been warned by the intelligence community, do not talk about this, because this is the crown jewel of what we're doing to deceive the public. And if you do, we'll be sure that you are discredited. I was warned very specific, and so I have been. But he said, you know, you're really right, because we have people that have come through our program and they have memories of these things that look like an alien doing this stuff, abducting them, but then they'll remember that there's a military controller or command group that's doing it. And that part is being sanitized out of what we're releasing to the public. I said, well, why? He says, because Bud doesn't want to. Well, it turns out, you know, Prince Hans Adam von Liechtenstein, who I'd met with, who was funding that, told me, he says, we want the public to hate the aliens so that we can have World War III that will be interplanetary. And if we can have enough of an Armageddon, Christ will return. Now, this is what the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein personally, face-to-face, told me in a meeting I had in 1994. So I began to realize that there was an agenda here of stagecraft and deception that was overriding the actual ET contact experiences people were having. And that was what was getting big book deals, movie deals, headlining UFO conferences, and so on. But I was told that the truth is so much more bizarre than the fiction that people believe, that if you speak it, it will discredit you. And that's been the hardest thing for me to deal with. And there are a lot of sort of Greer haters out there, because I will talk about this, but I think the public, and by no means am I saying that everyone who's had a contact experience or even an onboard experience have had a deceptive indication and warning or a false flag op run on them. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying there are a lot of them, lots, thousands. And so the problem is, if you don't have that information, it's like a doctor who is incompetent, who doesn't know that there are dozens of things chest pain can be. If you only think chest pain is a heart attack, everybody with chest pain has a heart attack. You're going to miss a pulmonary embolus, you're going to miss pneumonia, you're going to miss a dissecting thoracic aneurysm, you're going to miss a ton of stuff. So what I think what we have to do in the research community, in the UFO community, is step back, look at what's going on, understand how counterintelligence operations or conduct themselves, and what their assets are. What are the technologies that are within the intelligence community that could deceive the public? Because if we don't expose that, then we're sitting ducks for a false flag. And a lot of people don't want to hear this. They want to kill the messenger. I'm just the messenger. And honestly, I didn't start out believing this at all until I had so many points of reference to it that it became undeniable. And then, the pièce de résistance, I was targeted with one of these systems. The night after I had this long meeting with the Crown Prince of, they don't have a king, the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein, and he was trying to pull me over to the dark side, as it were. I hate to sound Star Wars-ish, but And I wasn't buying it because I had already been read into these sort of counterintelligence stagecraft operations. I had one of these systems targeted in my hotel room at the St. Moritz Hotel on Central Park South in New York, because I was meeting with Prince Hans Adam von Liechtenstein at the Four Seasons Pier there on Fifth Avenue. And I said, I was asleep, and it was an electronic warfare system, and it came in, and it was the most terrifying. It was like electronic black magic, and they were specifically targeting me and trying to pull I'm glad we're at Gaia, because it's the only crowd that would understand this, the sort of subtle body of light, astral body, out of my physical body to pull it out and torture it, and then put it back in with stigmata. So if you understand how that works, the physical body is actually a radiant manifestation of the inner body of light and of the conscious body. But they have technologies that can do this. Yes, they do. And I was being targeted with this. Now, the people said, what did you do? I said, well, luckily, before I was a doctor, I became a Vedic scholar and meditator and meditation teacher. And so I went into deep meditation and called on this unbounded mind of the cosmos. And the drop of myself became the ocean. I transcended, and it stopped. Because they can't grab the ocean. They can only grab the drop. Mm-hmm. Remember that, all of you. So if you stay connected to the light and stay connected to the greater, there's nothing to do. So that's what I did, but I had to do it over and over. Each time I would emerge back into ego, individual consciousness, self, it would hit me again. And it was really horrible.
I've heard these before.
And so I personally have experienced this. And here's what's beautiful about it. Because I've spent 40 some years studying and practicing remote viewing and meditation and higher states of consciousness, I was able to track back to source and see who was doing it and what they had. So all they did was tip their hand to me. And I was able to see who was doing it, how they were doing it, what the electronic system was. And I know I probably am putting my credibility at risk by talking about this personal experience, but so what? I mean, I'm getting old, I might as well share it. But this is what happened in 1994, in July. And so I not only had people in the intelligence community and in the corporate world who were running these systems inform me of this, and now Richard Doty in the film Unacknowledged, but in the book, if you read the whole book, which has 5 times more information, the book Unacknowledged, he actually has this information where he talks about this being done at different places. And so I know that that's going on. If you know that's going on, you have to put up an alert to the public. It's like an Amber Alert, but this is a cosmic Amber Alert, that the public is being targeted with events, disinformation, frightening things, to manipulate opinion in the direction of there being an alien threat to support World War III, a false flag. And of course, recently we've had the president announce a space force. I think all of this is very ominous. And we have to, the only way they could get away with this is by an uninformed citizenry. If the citizens are knowledgeable, they can't get away with the trick, right? So my objective has been to expose the trickery so that people won't be, it's like the Who, we won't be fooled again. Well, unfortunately, we've been fooled again and again and again since Vietnam. And I think that my point is, let's not be fooled again. Let's have our eyes open to this. And it isn't about sort of one personality or another and it's about knowing what the truth is, understanding what we're at risk for by not having this information. And then once you have the information, you can tell the difference between an ET experience and a contrived stagecraft man-made one. And by the way, the man-made UFOs have seams, rivets, sections, parts. The interstellar ones do not. They're seamless. And we can get into how they're manufactured, I understand it. But I think that there is a need for the public who will see this show, and I hope millions of people do, understand that there is an intent within the deep intelligence operations and unacknowledged special access projects to deceive the public for a purpose. And people say, well, to what reason would they do this? Sometimes it's to cover up a man-made event that was inadvertently seen, like the Cash Landrum, or there was an event that was happened in Washington State where someone saw a man-made UFO that was moving, and Richard Doty admits that those people were subsequently abducted so that they would think they saw an alien craft when it was one of ours. And I think that kind of, the nasty level of counterintelligence and stagecraft has been running around since the 50s very healthily and unchecked, because no one has really blown the whistle on it. So I'm trying to expose that so people understand. It's not to say that everyone who's had an experience isn't legitimate. They have. But what was that experience? Where did it come from? Now there's one other level, and that's the interdimensional. Not to confuse things too far, but if you want to talk about what the CIA folks call WSFM, Weird Science and Frickin' Magic, that's what they call this. Okay, that's the term used, WSFM. At Northrop Grumman, they just call it PFM, Pure Effin' Magic. So, my uncle's old company. But I think that when you look at this, the WSFM associated with this is the weird science and frickin' magic part of it has within it technologies where people could completely have a seamless experience thinking it was alien when it's man-made. And it's much more developed than people realize. And it's not just holographic or psychotronic, it's actually physical systems, these programmed life forms that are actually man-made.
So you're saying they can take them out of like their bedroom and put them into an experience?
Yes.
And then back in, and
yes.
And they're for sure they think that it was real.
They absolutely think that it's
lie
ET.
detector, the whole thing.
Yes, and because it was a real experience. They just don't. But you have to understand who was doing it.
Right. It was.
Was it ET?
Yeah.
Or was it a counterintelligence operation? Now it gets a little more complicated. There are a lot of people who've experienced ET contact that will then be targeted, unfortunately, with a man-made experience to affect their memory, but also to affect their assessment of the ETs.
Because originally they thought the ETs were really cool.
Yes.
And then they abducted them, now they're evil.
And the problem has evolved. It's become such an article. What's happened in ufology, there are these catechisms. It's almost like the Catholic Church, a belief and assumptions that have built up over 60 years, 50 years. And I think we have to take a step back and say, let's take a deep breath, look at this, and begin to understand that, take to heart the Wilbur-Smith Canadian top secret document that said that this subject in 1951, before we detonated the first atomic bomb, was the most classified subject in the US government, exceeding the development of the hydrogen bomb. Now that's a top secret document, it's in the disclosure material, most of you have seen it. What would you do to hide what you're doing? Well, you hide it in plain sight. You create stagecraft and events that can obfuscate, confuse, deceive. And that's the stock and trade of counterintelligence. And I think this is really something we have to be educated on, is how does counterintelligence operate? But also a deep dive into what assets do they have that have been developed since the 40s and 50s, not just in airframes that look like a UFO and creatures that could look like an alien, but electromagnetic warfare systems that can affect consciousness and thought and hallucinogenic sort of experiences. All of that has been brought to bear. And it's been trained on people who have been in military programs. It's been trained on military-associated families. I was told very specifically that a number of leaders around the world have had their family members or themselves abducted by covert counterintelligence military, made to look alien so that they would learn to hate the aliens and support the agenda of interplanetary war.
Why do they want us to hate aliens?
It's lucrative. Remember, the organizing principle for thousands of years on Earth has been war. or an us versus them, geopolitical, whether it's the nation state, before that, tribalism, and then nations, and then coalitions of nations, or axis of evil. So there is the original sin of humanity, if you will, is this part of us that comes from our primate roots to divide into troops or tribes. And anyone who's different is a threat, and that otherness we hate. Now, we live in a time where it's not particularly politically correct to be an overt racist, although that seems to be getting back in favor, or homophobic, or misogynist, or an anti-Semite, or what have you, in polite company. It's perfectly okay to have those views towards aliens. I call this alienism, where what the intelligence community, and they're very good at doing this, is exploiting that human proclivity, the human tendency
Towards tribalism.
To create another enemy, another them, an us versus them. And this has been done over 50, 60 years very cleverly. These people really do know what they're doing I mean, they may be evil, but they're not altogether stupid. It's like Hitler's henchmen. I mean, they were evil as crap, but some of them were really brilliant. They were evil geniuses. So some of these folks really do know how to exploit that. And the purpose of it is to organize people around a centralized, militaristic, fear-based system instead of a love-based, peaceful, enlightened world. And this is why I think it's very important that like a network like Gaia, that it's about the earth and its future and peace and the environment, understand this and the people be educated so that people do not get pulled into this us versus them nexus of humans versus aliens. And I think the humans versus aliens dichotomy is very appealing because there's a part of us, a dark part of humanity, that now that it isn't okay to be overtly racist or overtly homophobic or overtly whatever it is. I mean, I shared at lunch, I was almost murdered because I had a African-American girlfriend in high school in North Carolina in 1972 and 3. But that maybe wouldn't happen now. It might. But in Charlottesville, where I live now, the skinheads were there last year.
It seems to me that tribalism is on the rise right now.
Tribalism is, but it's being exploited by demagogues, people who are demagogic. And the demagogues know how to exploit that. But the intelligence community knows how to exploit it. And they can not only exploit it by simulating alien events, but they have technologies that can bring in from other dimensions non-ET, non-human, interdimensional creatures. Now this gets into the very deep end of the WSFM. And I don't know if you want to talk about this.
Yeah, I do.
It's scary, it's real, it's fully developed, and it's basically the ability to weaponize a Stargate. Or let's say you have an electromagnetic system and you hit a certain frequency, you can tap into some other dimension of all kinds of kind of like spooky creatures, and you can then bring them into 3D. It's interesting. People have heard these stories at Montauk, where these electromagnetic systems have brought these weird things that escaped. A couple of them escaped on the beach and got loose.
There's a show on Netflix about this. Stranger Things.
Stranger Things. Well, that's fictional, but I've been read into the real part of it. So, and for example, right now there's a operation up in Salt Lake City being run by a tech guy, but has a lot of CIA people involved with it, where they have a basketball-size device. I've just in the last couple months been briefed on it. And it can teleport and create anti-gravity and free energy, but recently they hit a certain frequency where they hit other dimensions. Now, it wasn't extraterrestrial they were contacting, it was these other dimensions that are non-ET. Right. So you have to understand the cosmology here that I talk about. And so it was, then they had video cameras. I've been trying to get a copy of this videotape of these creatures pouring into the room. are coming in and out of this device. Now that can be used in a stagecraft setting and say, see, this is what the aliens are. Well, those are not ETs, but they're not human. But they're these things from, I don't know what they're tapping into, the ninth ring of hell. I don't know what it is.
Isn't this like really dangerous?
Oh, it's extremely dangerous. And so it not only is extremely dangerous, but it's something that in the hands of people who have a certain agenda, let's call it an eschatological, eschatology is the study of how the world will end, sort of the end of the world crowd, the Armageddon type people. In the hands of those people, they could create events and scenarios that would be terrifying. And those are fully operational. Now, this particular private equity group, they stumbled across this on their own. But classified projects were stumbling across this in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I was talking to a man who was in the Cube at Lockheed Skunk Works underground facility. It's the really sensitive facility near the Edwards base, but up, and it's called the Cube. And he says, oh yeah, we could hook people, and that we had systems that would hit a certain frequency and that would connect to various dimensions and pull, and there would be creatures in 3D running around the lab. But there weren't ETs, but they could be presented as aliens. So I said, alien has become a catchword for actual extraterrestrial biological life forms from other planetary systems. Stagecraft being, as I've been discussing, by the intelligence community to deceive people. And then these interdimensional warfare systems and electromagnetic systems that can tap into those other dimensions and bring those into this dimension, but then masquerade them as aliens. Now, there are people who've had actual experiences with beings from other dimensions thinking they were ET, but they're not. So I call this cosmological confusion that has evolved. We could do an entire show, I think, which would be quite elucidating, on the problem of the cosmology that people have as an operating system in their awareness, where they're confusing actual ET events with the stagecraft man-made counterintelligence with other experiences with beings from other dimensions. And it could be a lower dimension or an angelic dimension. And that's different from an extraterrestrial civilization. But remember, and this is why this is very confusing, if you can go from star A to star B faster than the speed of light, you are, a priori, by definition, crossing through other dimensions. And they can come in from, they are dropping out of linear space-time and moving dimensionally, shifting dimensionally to another point in space-time that maybe is 100,000 light years or 1,000,000 light years or 1,000,000,000 light years away. So those civilizations, those ET civilizations, have technologies that would look magical to you. And so unless you have this other information, you could be forgiven for confusing an actual ET contact experience with another interdimensional being with a stagecraft operation. Yeah. Do you see where I'm saying? So this is where I'm trying to bring clarity to a very complex issue. Everybody wants simple, 142 character Twitter answers. Unfortunately, I'm the wrong guy to give you that, because if you want to know the deep information, I'll provide it. But it's a deep dive into understanding not only the cosmos, but also the technologies that are extant, that are fully operational around the world in classified projects that can simulate all of this. So the public, by not knowing this, really this is all information everyone should have known from the 50s on, right. Honestly. All these really high-tech electronics, anti-gravity, trans-dimensional physics, consciousness, higher consciousness, and the flip side of it, those systems being used for negative purposes, all that should be something in the public domain. Without that knowledge, we're all vulnerable to deception. So one of my objectives, while I'm still on this planet and this plane, is to provide that information so that people can make an informed assessment and not be deceived by people who would like to deceive you in order to aggrandize their agenda of centralized power and control over the planet for war and for accumulating power. Because I think that is a paradigm that is quickly dying, and they're trying to resuscitate it. It's on life support. That's the old world that's collapsing. There's a new civilization that's emerging, that's going to be conscious, enlightened, knowledgeable, based in higher states of consciousness, higher physics, used for the good. But there's a countervailing force that wants to maintain this old paradigm of us versus them and get people to buy into it through fear. And so fear is the great mind killer, it's the spirit killer. And I think that I'm not saying that some of these things aren't scary. I mean, it was kind of scary when I had this experience, that when I was targeted with one of these systems. But I was able to transcend my fear by going into the place of infinite light, infinite love, where I went when I died, my near-death experience. And so it sort of brought me in, I was able to escape that. So interestingly, the problem is in its root spiritual and the solution is spiritual.